Our next speaker, I get to call now, after today, a fellow panelist. I've known him for a while, at least in the industry circles. He is the VP of Product Management at Syniverse, Chris Galdun. Please welcome Chris.
All right. Well, we've talked a lot about the same themes again and again and again today. So unfortunately, my deck is very, very similar. So I'll talk a little bit about an experience that Syniverse may have had. So I want to talk about, again, bad actors and spam. You just listened to a lot of that. Talk about protecting the Canadian ecosystem and some opportunities. Again, recurring themes. I'll talk, and I'll ask. Feel free to ask questions while I'm doing this. So let's keep going. So a data point that I thought was interesting here was 83% of reported phishing messages were sent via text to Canadian consumers. This was a study done last year. That's a big number. Followed behind it was voice. So that's a lot. So we talked about bad actors. We talked about the different types of traffic. I've talked in the past, or on the stage talking about inter-carrier messaging. 10DLC sits on top of that channel today. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it does. So as we look at anti-fraud, anti-spam, where really context becomes a very important trait. Again, I know I'm beating the dead horse, but it's important to me. As we talk about traffic that's flowing, depending on who's sending it, why it's being sent, it might be legitimate. If I receive a fraudulent message that maybe comes from an enterprise, and I want to forward it to my IT department, should that person-to-person message be blocked? We need to have the right rules in place to help identify that, let things like that through while blocking the fraudulent messages. So again, there's a lot of examples like that just from spam. We saw early on, we've been doing this a long time, anti-spam on SMS, we start catching that, we block it. It moved to text-based MMS. So then you have to start scraping the MMS and doing it. Then it moves into the image. You've got a cloud, you've got the message inside of the cloud, the same image, start blocking that. Now they just get smarter and smarter. It's kind of like hacking security encryptions. We have to stay vigilant. We have to keep moving forward because the bad actors are going to do the same. Talked a little bit about this. We've all talked about it in length. Anti-spam. The more data we have feeding into the various algorithms, the better. Be it shortcode type traffic, be it 10DLC type traffic, P2P traffic. SMS, MMS, RCS, you name it. All of these channels are more powerful, the data as it gets together and together. Because then if you're jumping from channel to channel, or if you're jumping from message type to message type, you'll identify it better. You can start to knock out those bad actors. Or, as we've seen in the US, bad actors move from one provider to another provider. The more commonalities of the data points means we'll identify that. So that they've been blocked and identified, let's say with entity A, they're now sending traffic to entity B. We don't want to have to start over. It would be nice to have that central repository that says, yep, bad actor, let's block it out of the gate. Know your customer. This one, I won't belabor the point about how we verify the brand level. What I haven't heard a lot about today is verifying the campaigns. Validating that the campaign that a brand is putting out there is actually compliant with the various rules and regulations, going through and potentially testing things, like is that website legitimate? Read the T's and C's, identify, does everything line up with that? We stood up a vetting team, a very large organization, to go through every single campaign flowing through our network. Big undertaking, but the things we identified have kept the network cleaner and cleaner. We saw a drop in tickets. We saw a drop in carrier-related escalations because of this. We need to keep going down this path. Now, yes, we'd love to add more and more artificial intelligence into it. We started rolling that out. We highly recommend we keep learning. Again, I'm going to talk about common data. Lessons learned from one company to another company, especially as it pertains to bad actors. We should be centralizing. We should be talking through. We should be all taking advantage of that data. And then just an example of a potential KPI, tracking opt-out messages. If you have a change in behavior in a campaign, it may have been running great, bad actor gets a hold of it. All of a sudden you have a lot of people opting out, or you're replying back to this is spam message. We should be seeing that data and taking action proactively. We should not be waiting until we get a complaint from somebody. So the more data we get, the more solutions we can provide that show, hey, we're noticing a big change here. It either becomes a conversation with a customer to start correcting it, identify maybe this is good, or it's let's proactively block it. I think earlier today the comment was false positives are not a bad thing. So maybe sometimes we overblock, but it leads to the conversation where we can clean it up and we can help educate somebody as to why this looks bad, or it identifies a new use case that we as an ecosystem need to actually learn from and guide differently. And then lastly, again, we touched on this, how do we start? What do we do next? There is a code of conduct for shortcodes in Canada. We should replicate that. We should put it out there for 10DLC so that we all have a common standard, common marching orders to what we want to do. And then, again, lastly, we talked about a lot of different channels. I list them on this slide a little bit. We should have messaging filters, different priorities set up for 10DLC versus P2P versus toll-free. All the different channels have different idiosyncrasies. We need to account for that, but we need to actually put the protections in place across all of them. And then still, again, leverage the learnings from all of them to identify repeat bad actors, and go from there. I've talked again, I know I'm repeating myself from a lot of what we've talked about today. We've got a lot of data flowing through our network. I go back, most of you know me, 22 years, inter-carrier messaging, start, grow into A2P. There's a lot of data there. And we don't want to break any part of our respective ecosystems as we roll these new pieces out. We have to be very methodical and smart as we put in 10DLC policies and rules to ensure that we don't break the user experience for text messaging, P2P. Everybody's come to expect it, it works. Let's not change that. We made some mistakes over the past few years that came close to doing that in the US. Let's learn from those mistakes as we move forward in Canada. So, like I said, I repeated a lot of what we talked about, so I didn't want to go in excruciating detail. I'll open it up for questions at this point.
Surely someone has a question.
Ask anything.
I mean, you shouldn't have an open mic, some of these people in the room. It's either going to be me or Stefan. So here's a question, and this is just a curiosity, and I don't mean for this to sound antagonistic. It's a great preface, I know. When it comes to the traffic that's currently running into Canada, is that reviewed for compliance with the shortcode handbook today?
So,
in the Canadian shortcode handbook before it's delivered in Canada?
No.
Okay.
Simple answer is no. If it's a campaign that's being registered elsewhere, we will look at it, but we're not specifically looking for Canada. Yeah, that's. I mentioned it in the earlier panel today. Traffic's flowing today. We need to talk through how we clean up what's there, how do we legitimize it, and if we need to shut down, we need to shut down.
Well, so I'm always curious and surprised about the span of Syniverse, of how much that Syniverse does on a daily basis, not just in North American markets, but worldwide. Are you surprised about how fast Syniverse has grown in the last couple of years in terms of messaging? And what excites you about, let's say, the next 6 to 9 months?
So I'll say no, it didn't surprise me. If I go back towards the pandemic and we all had various hits to our respective businesses, messaging did not. Especially the inter-carrier piece. We saw huge growth in MMS, which has led to some fraud activity we've had to police, but group messaging became important to all of us, keeping in touch with everybody. And so we saw growth while the rest of our business declined. So no, it did not surprise me. It actually, I thought, was an interesting byproduct of the pandemic. Not that I want to say I got excited by the pandemic, but it was a nice growth as we were looking through other parts of the business. Now, looking forward, what excites me, I'd like to say the possibility of RCS. It's the, SMS is not going away. Like I said, I've been doing this 22 years, and everybody's like, oh, a couple more years, SMS is gone. It's still here. It's not going anywhere. I think it was Ryan sitting next to me used the word ubiquitous. It's every device can get SMS. So until that shifts, until something else is embedded on every device, it is going to continue to be that important, and continue to grow. I like seeing the change from just person to person to A2P traffic. I like seeing legitimizing it. The growth in the US, it's been painful, but it's now, we've kind of crossed the threshold where it's getting cleaner and cleaner day over day. Hopefully by end of year, not going to be 100% there, but it'll be clean. We can see the growth. We see the new use cases that pop up. We talked about political earlier. A lot of 10DLC is local based. You're interacting with your local bank branch because it's the phone number. You recognize it. So what other use cases are out there? I'm excited day over day when somebody else comes up with what if we did this? A UCAS solution, or that. So that's really what I find exciting over the next 6-12 months. Great. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much.